Every military tactic explained. What decides a battle before the first shot and bends nations without storming a gate? How do generals use time, terrain, and fear to break strong armies fast? From forest traps to steel walls at sea, these tactics share one quiet engine: control. Control of movement, supplies, and even belief. Later in this video, we will test each method against real wars, from Rome to the World Wars, and expose the pattern that winners repeat. Curious which tactic changes everything? Stay with me. You'll have the answer by the end. Have you ever wondered how small armies sometimes crushed forces twice their size? How could a few men defeat legions, empires, and entire coalitions? The secret lies in one timeless idea: divide and conquer. From the ancient world to modern battlefields, it has shaped wars, toppled nations, and rewritten history. Yet it's not about power alone. It's about understanding human nature, because when unity breaks, strength disappears. The Romans knew this better than anyone. Julius Caesar faced huge Gallic armies that outnumbered him at every turn. But Caesar saw what others didn't. Those tribes didn't trust one another. So instead of fighting them all at once, he isolated them. He attacked one tribe while keeping others at bay. And when the rest tried to regroup, he built walls, 2 of them. One facing out to block reinforcements, one facing in to trap the enemy inside. It was pure genius. That battle became a lesson for centuries. You don't win by smashing everything head-on. You win by cutting your enemy into smaller, weaker pieces. Alexander the Great used the same logic, but he didn't just divide armies. He divided loyalties. Before facing the Persians, he sent diplomats, gold, and promises across the empire. He didn't conquer every city with swords. Some surrendered because their allies abandoned them. When the Persians finally met him on the battlefield, their lines were thinned by betrayal. They were already cracked. Now think about what that means. Divide and conquer isn't only about movement. It's about manipulation. It's about knowing that fear spreads faster than courage. Fast forward to 1805. Napoleon Bonaparte stood against Austria and Russia, 2 mighty powers joining to crush him. He moved faster than they expected. Instead of waiting for them to unite, he struck each army separately. At Ulm, he surrounded and captured an entire Austrian force before Russia could even arrive. Then he turned east and defeated the Russians at Austerlitz. He didn't just fight battles. He managed timing like a weapon. But let's pause here. What makes this tactic dangerous isn't just its power. It's the risk. To divide and conquer, you often have to divide your own army too. If your timing is off, your split forces can be destroyed. That's why it takes confidence bordering on madness. Confederate General Robert E. Lee proved that at Chancellorsville. The Union Army was bigger, better equipped, and confident. Lee split his smaller force. One part stayed to distract the enemy, while Stonewall Jackson led the other through thick Virginia woods. They struck from behind, at sunset, catching the Union troops off guard. Panic tore through the camp. Men ran before they even saw the attackers. Lee's gamble paid off. History remembers the victory, not the danger. But Lee knew how close it came to disaster. Had the Union noticed a few hours sooner, his army might have been wiped out. That's the thin line every commander walks. Even in modern times, the same rule applies. In World War II, Hitler's massive invasion of the Soviet Union looked unstoppable, but Stalin turned the tactic on him. Instead of meeting the Germans head-on, he stretched them thin. He let them chase false victories deep into Russian territory. Snow, hunger, and exhaustion did what bullets couldn't. German divisions lost contact. Their supply lines collapsed. One army became many broken pieces, and piece by piece, the Red Army destroyed them. So whether you're Caesar, Napoleon, or Stalin, the formula stays the same. You weaken, isolate, and overwhelm. It's elegant, brutal, and deeply human. But here's what's fascinating. Divide and conquer isn't only for battlefields. It shapes politics and power to this day. During the Cold War, the United States didn't fight the Soviet Union in open war. Instead, it worked to divide communist influence across the globe. Every time the Soviets tried to rally nations together, the U.S. created rival alliances, NATO in the West, SEATO in Asia, and deals with nations caught in between. Every divided front meant less power for Moscow. It was warfare, without war. And yet, sometimes this tactic backfires. During the Vietnam War, the United States tried to divide North from South, but instead of breaking unity, the effort united the Vietnamese under one cause: resistance. What was meant to fracture them instead strengthened their resolve. That's the danger when you misread the spirit of your opponent. Today, the same principle operates in a new arena. No tanks, no troops, no maps. It's fought through information, cyber warfare, media campaigns, and propaganda, all aimed to divide, not armies, but societies. Make a people doubt each other, and you don't need to invade. They weaken themselves. Divide and conquer has evolved, but it hasn't changed. So why does it keep working? Because it speaks to something ancient inside us. Fear of isolation, distrust of others, pride in independence. All powerful emotions that can be used like weapons. The best generals don't just read maps, they read people. Let's look at the pattern one more time. Caesar isolated tribes. Alexander divided alliances. Napoleon split armies. Lee split his own. Stalin stretched his enemy until they broke. Every one of them turned division into dominance. But remember this too. Unity is the one thing divide and conquer can never overcome. If your opponent refuses to break apart, if they stand shoulder to shoulder no matter what, then the tactic dies right there. That's why some battles in history, Thermopylae, Gettysburg, Stalingrad, became legends of unity. So next time you hear about a small side winning against a giant, think beyond weapons. Think about willpower, trust, and fear. Every victory starts not on the battlefield, but in the mind. And coming up next, we'll see how patience, terrain, and perfect timing turned waiting into warfare. That's right, ambush tactics, where one good trap could destroy entire armies. Stick around, because the next story will show how 50,000 Romans vanished in a single afternoon. What turns a confident army into confusion in 1 minute, and leaves veterans swearing the ground itself attacked them? How does quiet preparation beat loud strength? The answer is ambush warfare, the oldest smart tactic in the soldier's playbook. Later in this video, we will step into a rain-soaked forest and watch 3 Roman legions vanish. But first we need the method that made that disaster possible. An ambush begins long before the first shot. Commanders study habits, routes, and schedules until the enemy becomes predictable. They choose a narrow place where formations stretch and vision fails. They map a kill zone, a rectangle, or a bend where movement slows, then place teams on both sides with clear fields of fire. They pick a trigger, often a lead vehicle or a center marker, so every weapon opens at once. The goal is simple and brutal. Trap the enemy in a place where he cannot form a line, then hit him from angles he cannot answer. Surprise is only the first ingredient. Terrain multiplies surprise by shaping every choice the enemy makes under pressure. Forests channel columns, ravines block flanking, and soft ground steals speed when speed matters most. Weather adds to the trap. Rain kills visibility. Wind steals the sound of movement. Mud turns retreat into a pileup. In a good ambush, even silence is a weapon, because silence keeps the target moving forward with false confidence. Now the Roman forest. In the year 9, Governor Varus led 3 legions through the Teutoburg forest. The trail was narrow and broken. His local guide promised a safe road. That guide, a German noble named Arminius, had already stationed warriors along the bends and slopes. When the columns stretched into miles of scattered units, the signal came. Spears rained from the trees. Shields meant for a front rank could not face left and right at once. Officers tried to form blocks, but the ground would not allow it. With every attempt to gather, another volley cut through the mess. By the 3rd day, the legions had dissolved. Rome pulled back its frontier because one ambush taught the real cost of marching blind. The lesson repeated through centuries wherever narrow ground met bold planning. In mountain passes, light infantry waited above roads and rolled rocks before arrows. On river trails, fighters blew bridges after the lead elements crossed. The pattern stayed the same. Force the enemy to split. Hold him in place with fire. Crush the first reaction. Then vanish along pre-planned routes before his reserves arrive. A good ambush is not a last stand. It is a hit and fade that denies the enemy a target once the shock wears off. Consider the plains of Montana in 1876. Custer believed he faced a small camp. He split his regiment to envelope what he thought was a fleeing enemy. Instead, thousands of motivated warriors converged and attacked from multiple directions. The fight lasted minutes, not hours. Why did it collapse so fast? The attacking force chose the time and the ground, and forced the cavalry into hasty positions without mutual support. The principle was older than the West itself. Isolate, overwhelm, and leave no time to recover. Ambush warfare evolved with technology, but the logic never changed. In the 20th century, radios let small units coordinate fires and withdrawal with precision. Mines and command detonated charges turned roads into bait. Camouflage and night optics hid teams until the first burst. The Vietnam War made that adaptation famous. Small units studied American patrol patterns, chose tight jungle choke points, and opened with mines and automatic fire. By the time a patrol oriented on the first muzzle flash, a second angle was already cutting the flank. Pursuit trails were booby-trapped to punish rescue. The fight ended when the attackers chose to end it, not when the defenders felt ready. Ambush is not only about shooting. It is about control. Control of when the fight starts. Control of where the enemy stands. Control of how long the chaos lasts. That control is earned in rehearsal. Units practice initiation signals, sector boundaries, lane discipline, ammunition counts, casualty handling, and break contact drills. They stage diversion fires to confuse direction. They scatter caltrops or tire spikes to freeze vehicles in the kill zone. They plan caches along the exit route, so withdrawal does not stall for lack of magazines or water. The battle most viewers see lasts 30 seconds. The preparation took days. Countering ambushes demands humility and method. Experienced units distrust easy routes, vary schedules, and avoid patterns. Scouts move ahead into the flanks to feel the ground before the column commits. Engineers clear danger areas, mark safe lanes, and check likely trigger points. When an ambush begins, doctrine demands violence to survive. Units pour fire into the near edge to break the trap at the closest point, then bound by teams to gain a fighting position. Smoke blinds hostile angles. Vehicles push through soft obstacles rather than stop in the kill zone. Radios call for indirect fire on the far tree line to suppress unseen shooters. Survival comes from practiced reaction, not from bravado. Recent wars added new layers. In Iraq, roadside bombs became the trigger for complex ambushes that mixed small arms, mortars, and secondary charges. Convoys answered with armored hulls, jammers, gunners and protected turrets, and air overwatch that turned every rooftop into a watch space. Drones now scout ahead and spot disturbed soil or unusual traffic. Yet the duel remains the same. Attackers study habits and look for slack. Defenders fight their own comfort and refuse to be predictable. There is also a psychological harvest. A clever ambush does more than bleed a unit. It steals trust. Leaders begin to doubt maps, guides, even the calendar. Movement slows. Energy drains into constant caution. That moral effect is why small forces return to ambush again and again. They cannot match heavy armies in open battle, but they can make those armies feel hunted on every road. So what, finally, turns confidence into confusion? It is not magic. It is patience married to ground, timing married to surprise, and a clean exit that denies the enemy a second round. That is why 3 Roman legions disappeared in a forest. That is why a cavalry column collapsed on a sunny hill. That is why patrols in thick jungle felt the fight arrive from everywhere at once. We close the loop with a simple rule. Ambush warfare wins by deciding when the fight begins and when it ends. Every other advantage flows from that choice. In the next subtopic, we shift from quiet traps to loud dominance and study how overwhelming speed and visibility can break resistance before it forms. Shock and awe is the opposite face of the same coin, and together they explain why some battles end before they seem to start. What breaks resistance so quickly that units lose the will to fight before the first major ground clash begins? How can one side use speed, precision, and spectacle to make an opponent feel already defeated? That effect is the aim of shock and awe, a concept often called rapid dominance. Later in this video, we will connect the method to famous campaigns where cities watched the sky light up and command posts went dark within hours. But first we need the logic that makes overwhelming force work without wasting strength. Shock and awe does not mean simple brute force. It is a calculated display that targets understanding as much as targets on a map. Planners focus on the opponent's senses, judgment, and communications, then design a burst of action that floods those systems at once. The package blends air power, long-range missiles, electronic attack, cyber pressure, special operations raids, and loud public messaging. The goal is to convince leaders and soldiers that resistance is useless because key assets are already lost, relief is unlikely, and the next wave will be worse. Timing is the core of the method. Precision strikes open within minutes of each other, so no single unit can absorb, report, and recover before another system fails. Air defenses go first to clear the sky. Command and control nodes go next to cut orders. Power stations, fuel farms, and bridges follow to paralyze movement and logistics. Media transmit the scale in real time, which spreads the desired message faster than leaflets ever could. When a defender looks up and sees the same pattern in every direction, he feels surrounded by events, not just by forces. Speed requires preparation. Months of surveillance map radars, fiber routes, bunkers, antenna farms, and hardened shelters. Planners build aim-point lists with exact coordinates and preferred weapons. Tankers stage along air corridors. Drones take high seats to confirm damage. Naval platforms spread along launch arcs so missiles arrive in clusters. Each actor knows the sequence, the time on target, the abort rules, and the recovery lanes. Success feels sudden to an audience, but sudden is only the final layer of a long plan. The 1991 campaign against Iraq showed an early version of this logic even before the phrase was popular. Coalition aircraft and cruise missiles smashed air defenses, headquarters, and runways in days, while ground forces waited. The enemy's early warning picture collapsed. Pilots flew hundreds of sorties a day with low losses. By the time Armored Corps rolled, many Iraqi units were isolated, hungry, and hopeless. Precision and pace turned a massive theater into a narrow problem set, which is the quiet strength of shock and awe. A decade later, the 2003 invasion of Iraq attached the label directly to the opening strikes. Images of night skies filled with fire reached living rooms worldwide. Power grids flickered. Palaces and ministries took repeated hits. The message was plain. The coalition could hit anything, anywhere, at any hour. Whether one agrees with the policy choices is a separate debate, but the technique demonstrated how spectacle and precision can combine to shape early psychology on both sides of a conflict. Electronic warfare amplifies the effect. Jamming blinds radars, spoofs GPS, and disrupts radios so defenders cannot tell real attacks from feints. Cyber tools complicate restoration by corrupting software and network devices. When headquarters lose reliable situational awareness, they default to caution. Caution slows decisions. Slow decisions open gaps that the next strike widens. In that spiral, the attacker seems faster each hour, even if the actual sortie rate is unchanged. Perception becomes its own weapon. Commanders still consider limits and risks. Shock and awe works best against centralized systems that depend on connectivity and power. It loses edge against decentralized foes who can operate on paper orders, couriers, and small cell tactics. It may also generate political backlash if civilians suffer, which can erode strategic support. That is why modern packages aim for narrow aim points, nighttime timing, and clear public statements about objectives. The idea is to break the enemy's will without breaking the city that will exist after the war. Ground forces remain essential even in a rapid dominance campaign. Their presence gives the air and missile strikes meaning by threatening decisive terrain. Armored thrusts, airborne drops, and special operations raids translate shock into real control of roads, bridges, and depots. Without that translation, the defender may ride out the first storm and adapt. With it, local commanders feel pressure from two directions at once, overhead and on the horizon. That tension encourages surrender, desertion, or passive noncompliance, each of which ends resistance faster than a long slog. Countermeasures exist and grow each year. Hardened bunkers with independent power reduce vulnerability. Mobile launchers hide under decoys and move after each shot. Redundant fiber legs and microwave relays keep orders flowing without the main hub. Civil defense drills blunt fear by rehearsing blackout routines. Still, Each countermeasure forces the defender to spend time and resources on survival rather than on maneuver and initiative, which itself advances the attacker's goal. At its best, Shock and Awe is a campaign about tempo. The attacker sets a pace that the defender cannot match, forcing him to choose between protecting assets, commanding units, or moving supplies, but not all three. Every minute a leader spends searching for a working phone is a minute lost to prepare a counterattack. Every hour without clear orders is an hour where local units guess and make separate choices. Fragmentation results not from a single defeat, but from dozens of small delays that add up to paralysis. So what, finally, makes this approach overpower resistance before the first major ground clash? It is the union of precision, simultaneity, and communication. Precision destroys exactly what matters. Simultaneity denies time to react. Communication spreads the awareness that the pattern is repeating everywhere. Together they produce the feeling that the fight is already decided. That feeling is the target. When will collapses, battles end early, and lives on both sides may be spared a drawn-out grind. We close the loop with a practical bridge to the next tactic. Shock and Awe attacks the mind with scale from many angles at once. Flanking does the same thing with movement, using space rather than spectacle to create surprise and collapse a line. In the next subtopic, we will watch commanders bend a battlefield and place strength where the enemy least expects it, turning a solid front into a brittle shell with one well-timed swing. What breaks solid lines without a head-on slugfest and turns a strong front into a fast retreat? How can a smaller force win by choosing the right direction rather than the biggest hammer? The answer is the flank, the side of an army where attention is weakest, formations are thinnest, and movement matters more than raw power. Later in this video, we will see how a single turn on open ground trapped one of history's toughest armies. But first we need the method that makes flanking so decisive. A flank attack succeeds because battles are not flat pictures. They are living systems that depend on alignment, communication, and mutual support. When you hit the side of that system, you force units to twist their bodies and minds at the same time. Files turn, gaps open, and officers lose sight of neighboring companies. Ammunition paths break. Flags and radios carry mixed orders. The front still looks firm from a distance, yet coherence is already slipping away. Commanders plan for that moment by using a simple recipe: fix with one hand, strike with the other. Fixing forces hold the enemy in place with steady pressure and clear threats. They do not need to break through. They only need to keep the defender facing forward and spending ammunition. Meanwhile, the striking force moves along a covered route toward the side, guided by scouts and screened by cavalry, armor, or light infantry. Deception amplifies the effect. A feint at one wing draws reserves away. A noisy artillery prep on the center masks the quiet march around the edge. Good generals do not outrun the enemy. They outthink the clock so the flank arrives before the defender can pivot. At Marathon in 490 BC, the Athenians used an early, elegant version. Miltiades thinned the center to strengthen the wings, rushed the Persian line, and then folded both wings inward. The enemy's best troops were in the middle, but the fight was decided on the edges where the Greek push collapsed Persian cohesion. A century and a half later, Alexander the Great refined the art at Gaugamela. He drew Darius toward his right with a controlled, refused flank, then punched through a gap with the companion cavalry. Because the Persian center had stretched to meet his bait, the decisive strike landed against exposed sides and rear areas where a front no longer existed. No story shows flanking power more clearly than Cannae in 216 BC. Hannibal's army let its center bend while strong wings held steady. As the Roman mass pressed forward, Carthaginian cavalry swept around both sides and closed behind them. That double envelopment seized the Roman flanks and then erased their retreat. The result was not a slow defeat. It was a sudden collapse, because soldiers who cannot face a single direction cannot fight as one army. The lesson still stands. When flanks disappear, courage is not enough. Early modern commanders translated the same logic into disciplined patterns. Frederick the Great used the oblique order, waiting one wing while keeping the other back and angled away. His infantry hammered a single enemy flank with superior fire and numbers, forcing a retreat that rolled up the line from the corner. Napoleon applied speed and roads to the problem. He tied one opponent with a holding force, marched hard to a vulnerable side, and struck before Allied columns could unite. He did not need to destroy an entire coalition at once. He needed to surprise one partner on a flank and then turn that success into a larger unraveling. Industrial war multiplied both the reach and the risk. In 1914 at Tannenberg, German rail mobility allowed Hindenburg and Ludendorff to shift corps across East Prussia, fix one Russian army, and then slam into the other's open side. The encirclement that followed was an operational level flank. The idea scaled from a hillside to a theater. In 1940, armored divisions crossing at Sedan avoided the strongest sections of the French line, raced into the rear, and sliced sideways to the Channel. What looked like a breakthrough was really a giant flanking movement that cut off the best Allied armies in Belgium. In 1944, the American breakout at Avranches turned west into Brittany to disrupt ports, then pivoted east to close the Falaise pocket. Again, the method was familiar: fix, turn, and close, but engines and radios made the turn faster and the closure tighter. Flanking is not only grand maneuver. It lives at company level in towns and fields. Infantry doctrine teaches a fire team to suppress from the front while a second team slips to the side, clears a building from the rear, and forces the defender to face two directions. Armor uses the same idea with speed and angles. Tanks seek side shots where armor is thinner and optics are less protected. Artillery and drones extend the flank into the vertical. If a rooftop observer dies or a supply cart burns on a side street, the street fight changes shape even before anyone notices the body. There are counters, and wise defenders prepare them. A refused flank holds one wing back and anchors it on terrain that is hard to turn, such as a river bend, a cliff, or a fortified village. Reserves sit behind the threatened wing, not in the flashy center. Patrols watch likely approach routes. Obstacles and mines steer attackers toward fields of fire. The best counter of all is rhythm. If a commander rotates tired units and keeps a small, fresh force ready to pounce, a would-be flanker can be hit mid-stride, which is the moment when columns are long, maps are lies, and supply trucks lag behind. Flanking fails for three common reasons. First, poor reconnaissance misses a ditch, a marsh, or a hedge line that blocks the turn and stalls momentum. Second, the fixing force attacks too hard and burns out before the flank arrives, which warns the defender and invites a counterstroke. Third, the striking force crosses too much open ground without smoke, speed, or cover, turning a clever idea into a costly dash. Good generals reduce those risks with rehearsals, time gates, and clear signals. When the clock slips, they call off the swing rather than feed it more troops. The psychological effect of a flank can be larger than the body count. Soldiers accept danger to the front. They feel betrayal from the side. Rumors begin at the corner of a line and travel faster than runners. A unit that believes its flank is gone will often abandon careful positions and run toward imagined safety, which creates the very gap they fear. That moral shock is why commanders value flanking even when terrain is tight and casualties would be similar with a direct push. A clean turn can end a battle earlier and spare a city the ruin of a block-by-block grind. So what finally makes flanking the preferred art for patient commanders? It lets them choose where strength meets weakness, protects their own force from the heaviest fire, and multiplies the reward of every small success. The enemy can replace men. He cannot instantly replace a shattered sense of orientation. When maps stop matching reality, the fight is already leaning your way. We close the loop by looking at a hard truth. When a defender cannot stop a turn, he may try to deny the attacker the prize itself. That choice creates our next tactic. Scorched earth turns farms into deserts and bridges into rubble to starve a flanking army of fuel, food, and shelter. In the next subtopic, we will walk that grim road and see how burning your own land can still lead to victory. What can turn victory into a burden and make a conquering army weaker with every mile it advances? How can a nation lose towns, crops, and bridges yet still bend an invader's will? The answer is scorched earth, the harsh tactic of denying food, fuel, shelter, and roads to whoever follows. Later in this video, we will stand with soldiers who marched into empty barns and blackened fields, and see how hunger can defeat courage. But first we need the logic that turns retreat into a weapon. Scorched Earth begins with a sober decision. Leaders accept that a region will be fought over and may be occupied. Instead of leaving resources for the enemy, they remove or destroy them in an organized way. The method follows a checklist. Evacuate civilians and livestock. Harvest or burn grain. Drain fuel depots and wreck pumps. Drop spans from bridges and mine crossroads. Pull rail spikes and torch ties. Remove factory belts and machine tools. Mark friendly caches for later use. Then fall back on a shorter line that can actually be defended. Every choice hurts now to avoid worse losses later. The tactic works because armies live off lines, not slogans. Food, fodder, and fuel must move from depots to units every day. If local supplies are gone, the invader must lengthen his logistics or slow his operations. Convoys grow, escorts thicken, breakdowns multiply, and maintenance consumes time that used to belong to maneuver. Commanders who expect a quick campaign find themselves stuck, not for lack of bravery, but for lack of calories and octane. When trucks haul food instead of shells, combat power shrinks even before a shot is fired. History's clearest examples show that pattern at scale. In 1812, Napoleon crossed into Russia with a brilliant army and a fast plan. Russian commanders refused a decisive battle in the open. They fell back, stripped villages, burned depots, and finally abandoned Moscow after setting fires that denied winter quarters. Napoleon held a famous city and almost nothing else. Horses starved. Men searched for grain in ruins. The march back became a nightmare of frost and hunger. The French lost not only soldiers, but also the aura of invincibility that had protected them for a decade. A campaign designed for speed died on a diet of ashes. 1 century later, the Eastern Front offered the same lesson with engines added. In 1941, German spearheads raced east during the first months of Operation Barbarossa. Soviet authorities evacuated factories by rail, packed tools and workers, and shipped them beyond the Urals. Those they could not move, they disabled. Fields were stripped, stores emptied, and bridges dropped. The Wehrmacht pressed forward but faced longer and thinner supply lines across broken infrastructure. By winter, fuel and spare parts were rationed like medicine. Cold finished what distance began. Scorched Earth did not win alone, but it set the terms of survival until Soviet strength returned. Smaller campaigns show how adaptable the method is. In the American Civil War, retreating forces often burned warehouses, cotton bales, and rail yards to slow pursuit. During World War II in the Philippines, withdrawing units destroyed fuel dumps and port gear, so the enemy had to rebuild basic capacity before any advance inland. In the Pacific Islands, defenders ruined airstrips and cisterns because water and runways mattered more than trophies. The targets change with geography, but the rule does not. Deny what the enemy needs sooner than he expects to need it. There is a political cost, and responsible leaders weigh it carefully. Scorched Earth hurts citizens who lose homes, tools, and harvests. It scars the landscape that must be rebuilt after the war. It can anger allies who plan to use those roads for a counteroffensive. Yet the alternative may be worse. If an invader can feed himself from your barns, he can keep his divisions in your fields for months. If he must ship every biscuit from far away, his timetable slows, his costs rise, and his public patience thins. The tactic trades near pain for long leverage. Execution quality makes the difference between grim discipline and wasteful panic. Good plans separate demolition lists into categories: must destroy, should destroy, and remove if time permits. Engineers prepare charges on key bridges days in advance with guarded firing points. Logisticians schedule last trains and then rip out switches. Civil authorities guide evacuations along preset routes to avoid blocking military columns. Rear guards fight short, sharp actions to buy hours rather than glory. The aim is time. Time to fall back to a new line. Time to bring up reserves. Time for weather to favor the defender. Invaders do not accept the problem passively. They answer with stockpiles, rail repair units, bridging companies, portable power, field bakeries, and water purification teams. Airlift and sealift reduce dependence on local goods. Civil affairs teams pay for supplies to create cooperation rather than resistance. Still, every workaround has a cost measured in speed. Engineers fixing a bridge are not pushing that bridge forward. Transport aircraft carrying food are not carrying ammunition. The defender wants the attacker to juggle too many needs at once. Modern war added two twists. First, precision weapons let defenders destroy selected assets on short notice. A convoy can roll across an intact bridge in the morning and find the next crossing gone by afternoon. Second, information war shapes perception of the damage. If the invader's soldiers post images of empty shelves and cold billets, their families and leaders read the real strain behind the official briefings. That morale effect compounds the logistics effect. The campaign feels longer and harder even if the front line barely moves. There are limits to scorched earth, and wise planners respect them. Destroying too much, too broadly, can alienate your own population, making recruitment and taxation harder. Burning fertile regions may create famine that lasts into peace. Overusing the tactic can also give the invader propaganda. He will claim to be a builder while you are a burner. That is why disciplined plans protect critical hospitals, water sources, and cultural sites, and why they emphasize temporary denial where possible, such as disabling transformers without wrecking dams. So what, finally, turns retreat into a weapon? It is the decision to fight the enemy's appetite instead of his spear point. Scorched earth attacks the rhythm of an army. It slows meals, fuelings, and repairs until operations lose tempo and pressure eases across the whole front. A general who sleeps in a burned town learns that ground without supplies is not ground held. When he shifts to protect his lifelines, he stops pressing yours. That trade is the defender's quiet victory. We close the loop by looking at the next hard choice in war. When an army cannot afford constant maneuver, it may choose to hold a strong place and let time do the bleeding. That brings us to siege warfare, where walls, trenches, and barrels of grain decide who yields first. In the next subtopic, we will watch how patience, pressure, and engineering starve an enemy into surrender without storming the gate. What wins when open fields fail, when walls refuse a frontal assault, and time itself becomes the sharpest weapon? How do commanders turn hunger, water, and fear into tools that break a fortress without breaking their own army? This is siege warfare, the long game where patience and engineering grind down will. Later in this video, we will enter Vicksburg and watch how river control starved a Confederate stronghold. But first we need the method that makes sieges work. A siege begins with isolation. The attacker cuts roads, rivers, and messenger routes so no food, powder, or reinforcements can enter the city. Blockade lines spread in a ring, with pickets and batteries placed to watch every gate. Scouts mark wells, mills, and storehouses inside the walls if visible from high ground. The goal is simple: stop the clock from being reset. Every loaf eaten inside must come from dwindling stores. Every horse slaughtered cannot be replaced. Time starts hurting the defender on day one. After isolation comes pressure. Artillery moves into prepared batteries to chip at walls, towers, and morale. Engineers push parallels and saps, zigzag trenches, toward the ramparts under cover of gabions and fascines. Miners tunnel beneath bastions to pack black powder and collapse the stone from below. At night, work parties roll forward mantlets and build ladders. The defender answers with counter-battery fire, night sorties, and countermine galleries. Both sides race to own the ground a few yards at a time. It is slow, exhausting, and precise, because a single bad angle exposes a trench to enfilade and wipes out days of labor. Alexander's siege of Tyre shows what stubborn engineering can do. The island city seemed unassailable behind high sea walls. Alexander built a mole, a giant causeway, out into the surf, stone by stone, under constant attack from fire ships and archers. He brought towers forward on the new ground, screened his workers, and finally breached the wall with rams and naval support. The lesson is not just persistence, it is adaptation. If the land does not exist, a determined besieger makes it, then brings his engines to bear. Guns changed everything. In 1453, Mehmed II turned Constantinople's ancient defenses into targets for massive bombards and disciplined infantry assaults. Cannon tore gaps that towers could not patch in time. Once the wall lost its shape, defenders lost their fighting geometry, and the city fell. From that point on, fortification design evolved into star forts with angled bastions to deflect shot and reduce dead ground. Siege became a duel between geometry and gunpowder. and the side that kept pace with the latest shape or the latest shell usually kept its flag. American audiences know the power of siege from Vicksburg. In 1863, Ulysses S. Grant crossed the Mississippi south of the city, cut loose from his own supply line to move fast, then turned and encircled the bluff. After 2 failed assaults, he settled into siege. Naval guns on the river and Union batteries on land sealed the place. Rations inside shrank from meat to peas to mule. Civilians dug caves into the clay to escape shell fire. After 47 days, the garrison surrendered, and the Mississippi became a Union river. The victory split the Confederacy and gave Lincoln the line he needed. The father of waters again goes unvexed to the sea. Psychology sits beside logistics in every long encirclement. Hunger hurts bodies, but uncertainty hurts decisions. Defenders ask how long relief will take, how much grain remains, whether disease will break the hospitals before the enemy breaks the gate. Attackers play on those doubts with leaflets, rumor, and visible displays of fresh supplies. A convoy of fodder wagons parading behind the siege lines sends a message as clear as a cannon shot. We can wait longer than you can. Desertion rises not when the wall cracks, but when hope does. Relief forces turn sieges into chess. A commander outside the walls tries to break the ring while the garrison sallies in support. The besieger must choose: thin the lines to face outward, or gamble on defeating relief fast and turning back before the garrison strikes. Successful sieges prepare for this with inner and outer works, lines facing both directions, so the army can pivot without abandoning the blockade. Failure to anticipate relief has cost many confident besiegers their victory and sometimes their lives. Disease is the hidden ally and the hidden enemy. Crowded cities run out of clean water, fuel for cooking, and space for the sick. Typhus and dysentery can kill more than shells. But besieging camps suffer too if sanitation fails. Smart commanders enforce strict camp hygiene, rotate work parties, and maintain fresh water points far from latrines. Engineers do more than dig toward the wall. They dig drains, ovens, and refuse pits to keep their own men in fighting shape while the clock cuts at the garrison. When does a siege end in storm, and when in surrender? The calculus weighs blood against time. If a breach offers a clean entry with limited loss, commanders may order an assault to avoid the cost of another month. If the breach leads into a street maze, patience can save thousands. In many famous cases, Acre, Orleans, Yorktown, external events forced the close. Allies arrived, fleets shifted, or a single successful battery finally silenced the key bastion. Siege is rarely about one dramatic blow. It is about cumulative change that suddenly reaches a decision point. Modern tools change forms without changing fundamentals. Precision artillery and rockets reduce the need for direct mining. Drones map rooftops, spot water tanks, and track ration lines. Electronic warfare cuts radio links, so commanders inside must send runners like their ancestors. Civilian protection rules shape target lists and timing, forcing narrower fires and more negotiation. Humanitarian corridors allow non-combatants to leave, which reduces political pressure on the besieger, but also reduces the defender's labor pool. Even with satellites and sensors, the old truth remains. If supplies cannot enter, resolve must do all the work, and resolve burns calories. Counter-siege tactics focus on elasticity. Defenders store food and fuel before the storm, dig secondary wells, and hide ammunition across the city so one strike cannot ignite it all. They build interior lines, streets blocked and bastions reversed, so losing the outer wall does not mean losing control. They drill for night sorties against saps and batteries, and use snipers to punish any worker who lifts his head above a parapet. Their best ally is a promised relief date that the troops believe, because belief keeps order when rations thin. So what makes siege warfare win without a spectacular breakthrough? It turns every sunrise into a subtraction problem the defender cannot solve, while guarding the attacker's strength for the final hour of decision. When bread runs out, when the well tastes of lime, when the surgeon's table never rests, a gate opens more surely than a cannon can blast it. Next, we shift from walls and trenches to shadows and trails. Guerrilla warfare flips the board, rejecting fixed positions and using mobility, disguise, and local support to unbalance stronger armies. Stick around to discover how the weak outlast the strong by choosing not to stand still. What lets small bands outlast regular armies and turn rough hills, alleys, and farms into a sprawling battlefield the strong cannot tame? How do fighters without tanks or fleets force empires to waste years, money, and nerve? The answer is guerrilla warfare, a method that trades set-piece battles for patience, movement, and local knowledge. Later in this video, we will see how a single province can exhaust a great power, but first we need the logic that makes irregular war work. Guerrilla warfare begins with a choice about time. Regular armies chase quick decision. Guerrillas chase durable pressure. The weaker force avoids heavy clashes, keeps casualties low, and stretches the calendar until fatigue becomes strategy. Geography becomes a partner. Forests, mountains, deserts, and city slums offer cover, routes, and safe hideouts that deny the enemy clear targets. When every road can ambush and every house can watch, daily movement turns into risk management for the stronger side. Organization matters more than headlines. Successful guerrillas build cells, not crowds, so the failure of one group does not unravel the rest. They recruit by kinship, tribe, church, union, or village ties, then enforce discipline with simple rules. Move at night, speak little, store gear in caches, and avoid the lure of grand attacks. Logistics stay small and mobile. Ammunition and food sit in many places, never in one big depot. Radios and runners pass short messages, because long conversations get people killed. The system grows like roots, not branches, and that shape keeps it alive after hard blows. Intelligence is the decisive currency. Guerrillas know who travels which road, which officer keeps sloppy hours, which patrols take shortcuts, and which contractor will sell fuel without questions. They learn the ground in detail, then pick their moments. Night markets hide meetings. Festivals cover movement. Bad weather masks a raid on a checkpoint or a depot. Each action aims at effect over spectacle. Cut a wire, burn a truck, seize a radio, scare a corrupt official, and slip away before the net closes. The name itself comes from Spain's war against Napoleon. Beginning in 1808, Spanish partisans harassed French columns, murdered couriers, and destroyed supply dumps, while British regulars under Wellington applied pressure in the field. The French won set battles, yet bled on the roads. Villagers fed fighters, hid weapons, and denied information to occupiers. The Imperial Army had superb officers and drills, but could not guard every barn and hill path. That mismatch, big formations versus small wounds, explains why a proud invader finally limped home. Across the Atlantic, colonists used similar logic before American independence hardened into conventional battles. Local militias struck supply lines, targeted loyalist strongholds, and disrupted movements in the backcountry. Regular regiments still won decisive fields, but irregular pressure made those victories costly and temporary. The pattern appears in many places afterward. Boer commandos in South Africa tied down a far larger force by moving fast, refusing fixed defense, and riding where rail lines ended. In Eastern Europe, partisans harried occupying forces with sabotage and ambush, forcing garrisons to guard every bridge and mill. Guerrilla method rarely wins by body count. It wins by eroding governance. If the stronger army cannot promise safe roads, reliable mail, steady markets, and honest courts, people hedge their bets. Shops close early. Farmers plant less. Parents send sons away. The message spreads that the state can punish but cannot protect. That perception matters more than a list of tactical results, because it changes the daily behavior that keeps a province loyal. A war of posts and fairs is the real front line, and guerrillas pressure that front better than they win firefights. Because legitimacy sits at the center, counter-guerrilla strategy must pair security with governance. Armies disperse into small outposts that live among the people, not behind razor wire. Patrols walk, talk, and buy locally, while intelligence teams map social networks. Engineers fix wells and roads to show reach without shelling. Police replace soldiers where possible, so arrests feel like law rather than conquest. Elections mean little if the ballot box sits beside an empty store and a closed clinic. The stronger side must make order visible most days, in most places, or it will keep losing the quiet hours between patrols. Mao Zedong described a phased approach that many movements attempt. In the first phase, guerrillas organize and avoid risk, building popular support and shadow governance. In the second, they escalate sabotage and raids, stretch the enemy thin, and push to control rural zones after dark. Only in the third phase do they try larger operations alongside regular units. Many groups never reach the third phase, some do not need to. If the opponents will breaks earlier, negotiation achieves what open battle might have cost. Terrain shapes tactics, but cities now host much of the fight. Urban guerrillas blend with commuters, use encrypted phones, and exploit the media cycle. A small attack can dominate news for days, forcing the state to divert resources and comfort a shaken public. Cameras act as both shield and weapon. Every faulty raid or rough arrest becomes propaganda that recruits faster than any speech. Smart governments answer by tightening standards, holding quick public hearings on failures, and rewarding restraint that keeps broader support. External sanctuaries change the math. If guerrillas can rest across a border or in a remote region beyond the state's reach, they recover after setbacks and train new cadres. Air power and drones can pressure sanctuaries, but cannot replace the political work needed to close them. Diplomacy, trade leverage, and local alliances matter as much as raids. History shows the cost of ignoring sanctuaries. Campaigns that look successful for a season but stall when the fighters return refreshed and better armed. There are limits to a regular war. Without popular backing, guerrillas fade into banditry and lose moral cover. If they overreach, hit soft civilian targets, or tax villages like conquerors, they trade short-term gains for long-term isolation. When farmers stop sharing news and food, the root system dries. States can hasten that outcome with amnesty, fair courts, and visible punishment of corrupt officials who drive people toward the underground. Guns alone rarely solve the problem, but steady justice undermines the grievance stories that feed recruitment. So what finally lets the weak beat the strong? Patience, local intelligence, flexible cells, and the steady erosion of an opponent's claim to protect and provide. Regular armies win battles. Guerrillas win Tuesdays, markets, and mornings, and the accumulation of ordinary days becomes the strategic verdict. That truth does not mean every insurgency succeeds. It means the strong must prove they deserve to govern, not just that they can patrol. Next, we turn from shadows to lightning. Blitzkrieg shows how a regular army can flip the script with speed, concentration, and shock, smashing through fronts before irregular pressure can take root. Stick around to discover how tanks, radios, and narrow thrusts changed the geometry of modern war. What lets an army cut through a front that looks solid, surround whole corps in days, and make yesterday's maps useless by noon? How can speed replace mass and shock replace attrition? The modern label is Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Later in this video, we will stand on a French riverbank and watch radios, tanks, and dive bombers turn a weak crossing into a national crisis. But first we need the method behind the headlines. Blitzkrieg is not just tanks going fast. It is a system that concentrates power at one point, breaks through, and then races deep to paralyze command and logistics. The Germans called the focus point the Schwerpunkt, the center of gravity. Instead of attacking along a broad front, they piled armor, motorized infantry, engineers, artillery, and close air support on a narrow slice. Radios linked every moving part. Mission-type orders, tell subordinates the goal and let them pick the route, kept tempo high. The result was a flow more than a push. This system grew in the interwar years. Thinkers studied World War I stalemate and asked how to avoid another trench grind. Better engines, tracked vehicles, and reliable two-way radios offered an answer. Heinz Guderian pushed hard for fast units with organic support, engineers to blast obstacles, artillery to smother strongpoints, and signals troops to keep everyone talking. Air power added the Stuka dive bomber, which could drop precisely on a bunker or a bridge just ahead of advancing columns. When every branch cooperated by the minute, a hole in the line became a highway. Poland in 1939 showed the first full version. German armor and motorized infantry punched through, while aircraft smashed rail hubs and columns trying to move west. The Polish army fought bravely, but could not reassemble under that pressure. Every time a new line formed, fast German elements were already past it, attacking from flank or rear. The campaign ended quickly because the defender never restored a coherent front. France in 1940 revealed the mature pattern. Allied planners expected a repeat of 1914, with the main German pushed through Belgium into northern France. The plan met expectations at first, drawing the best Allied armies forward. Then the main German armored mass drove through the Ardennes forest, which many considered unsuitable for large forces. Engineers cleared jams. Traffic control kept columns moving, and within days tanks reached the Meuse River near Sedan. Stukas pounded the far bank while artillery laid smoke and suppressive fire. Assault teams crossed, built bridgeheads, and rolled bridging forward. Once armor flooded the far side, the real shock began. Instead of turning to fight local battles, German commanders drove west toward the Channel. They targeted headquarters, fuel stores, and road nodes. Not every enemy unit. Cutoffs piled up behind them. The British Expeditionary Force and many French formations found themselves trapped in a pocket. Dunkirk's evacuation saved much of the British army, but the campaign was lost on land. Speed created dilemmas that firepower alone could not. Leaders had to choose between protecting flanks, restoring communications, or stopping the spearheads. They could not do all three at once. Why did it work so well? Tempo, communication, and initiative. Tempo denied the defender time to regroup. Radios gave leaders a live picture. Initiative empowered captains and majors to exploit chances without waiting for paperwork. A blown bridge that would have stalled a World War I column for a day became an engineer problem solved in an hour. A weak hedge line that once held for an afternoon was bypassed in minutes, while Stukas pinned the garrison. The defender fought, but he fought yesterday's threat while today's threat moved past him. Blitzkrieg had limits, and they appeared as soon as conditions shifted. The same speed that cut fronts also stretched supply lines. Fuel trucks had to reach columns racing across poor roads. Maintenance teams worked without sleep. A sudden thaw, a broken bridge, or a stubborn strongpoint could stall the tip and expose flanks. Moscow in late 1941 showed the cost of outrunning logistics and weather. Cold seized engines, tracks snapped, and infantry marched with thin coats. Initiative could not refill empty tanks or warm frozen oil. North Africa displayed a smaller but vivid version. Mobile forces under Rommel used speed and surprise to dislocate opponents again and again. Yet supply across the Mediterranean limited how long those thrusts could last. When the British and later the Americans improved logistics, radar, and air cover, the tempo advantage narrowed. Blitz methods still worked in bursts, but could not decide the war without fuel and replacement parts. Opponents also learned counters. Defense in depth scattered anti-tank guns, mines, and mobile reserves instead of building one rigid line. Strongpoints were placed on ground that blocked lateral movement, so a breakthrough could not easily turn. Artillery planned stop lines to pound likely routes the moment armor appeared. At Kursk in 1943, the Red Army layered mines, trenches, and anti-tank belts for miles, then held armored reserves to strike the tip after it slowed. The battle cost both sides dearly, but it proved that prepared depth and mobile counterattack could blunt a lightning thrust. Blitzkrieg influenced doctrine far beyond its origin. The Soviet concept of deep battle, developed before the war, interrupted by purges, and restored during it, aimed to break not just the front, but the whole operational system with successive echelons. Later, Western airland battle echoed the idea. Attack enemy second echelon forces and command nodes while ground forces penetrated the first line. The labels changed, but the thread stayed the same. Combine arms, compress time, and make the enemy's decisions late. One myth deserves correction. Blitzkrieg was not a formal German field manual title. It was a media word that stuck. The real engine was a culture of mission orders, well-trained NCOs, and practice in moving parts together. Without that culture, fast tanks become fast wrecks. With that culture, even modest units can act with speed that feels much larger than their numbers. So what, finally, makes lightning war change everything? It seizes the calendar. By forcing choices faster than headquarters can decide, it turns a strong army into scattered, brave fragments. Precision and speed create fear out of proportion to casualties, because troops feel the fight arriving from many directions at once. That moral shock matters as much as the physical breach. Next, we shift from movement to the mind. Psychological warfare aims to win decisions without costly battles, using rumor, radio, leaflets, and images to crack will before lines collapse. Stick around to discover how messages, not bullets, can silence an army's voice. What convinces soldiers to lower rifles before the first serious clash, and makes commanders doubt their own maps even when the roads are clear? How can words, images, and carefully staged signals break a defense faster than shells? That is psychological warfare, the deliberate effort to shape belief, perception, and will. Later in this video, we will step into a London office where a fake army fooled spies and radios. But first we need the method that turns messages into force. Psychological warfare begins with targets, not slogans. Planners map audiences the way artillery maps grids. Who decides to fight today? Who carries orders? Who talks at the market? Each group gets a tailored product. Soldiers receive surrender leaflets promising food, medical care, and fair treatment. Officers receive warnings that their supply depots are known and vulnerable. Civilians receive assurances that staying calm keeps their neighborhoods safe. The goal is not art. The goal is behavior. Delivery systems matter as much as content. Leaflets ride the wind behind aircraft. Loudspeakers reach trenches at night when nerves are raw. Radio programs and shortwave broadcasts slip past borders. In the modern era, text messages, hacked channels, and viral clips add speed and reach. The same rule still applies. Repetition builds familiarity. Familiarity lowers resistance. A message heard 10 times at dusk becomes a thought that feels like one's own by dawn. World War I offered the first large laboratory. Both sides dropped millions of leaflets promising good treatment for prisoners and highlighting hopeless odds. Many pamphlets were boring. A few worked because they tied hope to a concrete step. Walk to this line. Hold this paper. Raise your hands. When units began to surrender with the same scraps tucked in their belts, commanders took note. The weapons had not changed. The expectation of survival had. World War II raised the stakes and sophistication. The Allies built entire teams to craft stories, rumors, and radio shows. Some planted doubts about ration levels and leave schedules. Others spread news of losses before official notices arrived, proving reach and credibility. One of the most famous efforts, the deception plan for the Normandy invasion, used fake armies, dummy tanks, and controlled leaks to push German leaders toward a wrong conclusion. Operation Fortitude placed a phantom army in southeast England on paper, film, and airwaves. Because the story matched what the enemy already feared, a landing at the Pas de Calais, the lie felt true. Divisions stayed in the wrong place while the real landings went in elsewhere. That is psychological warfare at operational scale. On the Pacific Front, radio voices sought to sap morale with taunts and songs. Much of it rang hollow. Effective work required accuracy and restraint. When broadcasts reported genuine ship movements or casualty lists before rumor, listeners leaned closer next time. Credibility is ammunition. Waste it, and the gun goes silent. Keep it, and each sentence weighs more than the last. Vietnam showed a different angle, persuasion aimed at exit. The Chiu Hoi program offered safe conduct for defectors. Leaflets, radio spots, and loudspeakers explained exactly how to cross lines and what to expect. Defections did not end the war, but every fighter who changed sides carried information, removed a rifle from the next ambush, and became a living billboard for the promise that surrender could be honorable and safe. Again, the content worked because the steps were clear and the promise proved real. Coalition forces in 1991 repeated the pattern with modern tools. Leaflets mapped surrender lanes and showed photos of water points and collection sites. Radio broadcasts explained the procedure and emphasized humane treatment. When ground operations began, thousands of soldiers surrendered quickly, not because they were cowards, but because the message made sense in the conditions they faced: isolated units, shattered communications, and no hope of relief. Psychological warfare aligned perception with reality faster than traditional rumor. The method is not only about the enemy. It also protects one's own side from fear, doubt, and panic. Clear briefings, truthful updates, and visible care for casualties keep rumor from filling the gaps. When leaders tell hard truths quickly, false stories die early. When units see mail delivered, pay handled, and families supported, they fight with steadier minds. Homefront confidence is part of the battlefield. A calm factory floor produces shells. A worried one produces whispers. Deception remains a sharp edge, but it follows rules. Deceive about intentions and timing, not about promises to civilians or prisoners. Practical guidelines help. Tell the truth loudly where you can, lie narrowly where you must, and never contradict your own credible channels. The best deceptions imitate the enemy's expectations, then give them one nudge toward the wrong door. A good fake is a mirror with a slight curve. Too much curve, and it shatters on first touch. Countering psychological pressure demands discipline and counter-messaging. Units rehearse responses to rumors, rotate rests so fatigue does not amplify fear, and appoint trusted voices who speak plainly when news is bad. Secure communications deny the enemy easy leaks. Commanders plan information reserves much like fire reserves, holding credible spokesmen and verified images for moments when a fast, true story will stop a panic. Silence is rarely neutral. It invites the loudest lie to win. Technology changed channels, but not fundamentals. Social media can scatter panic in minutes. The answer is speed, clarity, and tone. Officials who correct errors without sneering keep audiences. Units that show real footage of care for prisoners undercut enemy charges. Drone video can prove a bridge intact or a convoy moving, and proof beats rumor. Yet the human core remains. People trust neighbors, pastors, sergeants, and doctors more than distant stars. Wise campaigns empower local voices to spread national messages. There are limits and laws. Harassing civilians for shock value may backfire badly, hardening resistance and staining a just cause. False promises about safe passage cost lives when exposed and poison the next negotiation. Psychological warfare is most powerful when it leans on truths the enemy already feels: hunger, isolation, overextension, or a failed policy. It is weakest when it tries to manufacture a new universe overnight. So what, finally, makes this approach win without a massive battle? It collapses the will that connects men to the mission. When soldiers believe tomorrow holds only hunger and air strikes, when officers believe their orders are delayed and their positions known, when families believe surrender is safer than stubbornness, the line thins by choice. Success comes not from a single clever phrase, but from a steady pressure of believable messages matched to visible facts on the ground. From the mind, we move to the map of trade and tides. Naval blockades use ships, law, and patience to throttle a nation's economy until factories slow, armies starve of fuel, and diplomats count barrels like bullets. Stick around to discover how steel walls at sea have strangled empires without a single storming of the capital. What weapon can halt factories without firing on them, starve an army without storming its trenches, and bend strategy with nothing more than steel hulls and patience? How does control of sea lanes decide wars fought far inland? That weapon is the naval blockade, the quiet pressure that turns trade into leverage and time into a cutting edge. Later in this video, we will watch grain prices in a capital become as important as guns at the front, but first we need the method that makes sea control translate into national pain. A blockade begins with a map, not a fleet. Planners mark ports, shipping routes, and choke points where most cargo must pass. The Strait of Gibraltar, the English Channel, the Danish Straits, Suez, Malacca, and Hormuz are classic valves. Ships and submarines do not have to sit off every harbor if they can dominate those valves. Next comes law and messaging. The declaring power names contraband, fuel, metals, weapons, sometimes food, and warns neutrals that inspected cargoes and detained hulls are part of the rules. Prize courts, signals to insurers, and public lists of intercepted ships turn the blockade into an international fact rather than a rumor. Execution blends presence and reach. Surface squadrons patrol approaches, hail merchantmen, and board suspicious vessels. Submarines and maritime patrol aircraft watch wider seas, tagging convoys for interception. Mines seal narrow waters cheaply. A few fields in the right channel can close a coastline. Intelligence is the multiplier. Code breaking, port watchers, bills of lading, and even stock market chatter reveal who is shipping what and where. The most efficient blockade is selective and informed. It stops the right cargoes and lets the rest pass, so pressure rises on the true bottlenecks of an enemy economy. Napoleon's day showed early versions with mixed success. Britain used the Royal Navy to bottle up French ports and throttle colonial trade. The French responded with the Continental System, a land-based embargo meant to starve Britain of markets. Smugglers thrived, but the long grind hurt France and its allies more. The lesson was simple and brutal. A maritime nation with the dominant fleet can wait, and a land empire with long coasts cannot wish the ocean away. The American Civil War gave a clear case of blockade shaping a continent. The Union declared the southern coast under blockade in 1861. At first, fast blockade runners slipped through with cotton and returned with rifles, cloth, and medicine. Over time, the North added more ships, seized key ports, and captured barrier islands to host coal and repair depots. Each closed inlet pushed runners onto longer, riskier routes. Prices for boots, salt, and powder soared. Southern armies still fought hard, but the quartermasters fell behind. A soldier fights on loyalty and rations. The blockade targeted the second and slowly undercut the first. World War I turned blockades into industrial strangulation. The Royal Navy's distant blockade forced neutral ships to route through British inspection, where cargoes bound for Germany were seized or delayed. Germany answered with U-boats against Allied shipping, but unrestricted submarine warfare carried political risks that eventually brought the United States into the war. By 1918, shortages inside Germany were severe. Railways lacked coal, factories lacked metals, and civilians faced hunger and disease. The front collapsed under many pressures, but the slow choke of trade was one of them. World War II repeated the duel on a larger scale. The Battle of the Atlantic was not only about convoys surviving. It was about whether Britain could remain the base for any return to Europe. Escort carriers, radar, sonar, HFDF, and code-breaking turned the tide against U-boats and kept the island supplied. At the same time, Allied control of sea lanes cut Germany off from many distant resources. In the Pacific, American submarines waged a relentless campaign against Japanese merchant shipping, sinking tankers and cargo ships until steel mills and airfields ran short of fuel and ore. Aircraft and mines closed ports that cruisers never saw. A nation of islands learned that ships are as vital as divisions. Blockade pressure is not only steel against hull. Insurance rates rise when risk rises. A cargo that costs twice as much to insure may not sail. Charter rates spike. Shippers choose other markets. Financial sanctions now link to maritime pressure, freezing payments and discouraging brokers. Satellites track AIS transponders, and analysts flag suspicious, dark gaps where ships turn off their beacons. A modern blockade may look like a web of inspections, seizures, banking rules, and data trails more than a ring of battleships, yet the effect is the same. Inputs dry up, output shrinks, and the war machine coughs. There are counters. Blockade runners use speed, low profiles, and weather. Neutrals change flags, route through permissive ports, and use false manifests. Submarines and aircraft strike, blockading ships from range. Mining the blockaders' approaches can impose caution. Diplomatic pressure matters too. If powerful neutrals see a blockade as overbroad or cruel, they may provide cover for wider trade or threaten retaliation. That is why smart blockades are targeted and predictable. They focus on true war goods, document seizures, and maintain channels for food and medicine so the moral front does not collapse against them. Law frames the contest. The Declaration of Paris and later conventions tried to regulate prize rules, neutral rights, and contraband lists. Practice often bent those rules under stress, but even then, careful states kept a legal case ready for each detained cargo. The courtroom matters because shipping is a business of contracts and trust. If owners believe a route will end in fair adjudication rather than random loss, some trade continues. If they fear arbitrary seizure, they stay home. In that sense, the judge's pen can be as decisive as a cruiser's guns. Blockades carry risk for the initiator. Ships far from home eat fuel, need repair, and tie down crews for months. A single disaster, a surprise air raid on a harbor, a submarine ambush near a patrol line, can wobble public confidence. A long blockade also tempts overreach. If the line between contraband and civilian goods blurs, headlines can flip sympathy toward the other side. Wise planners measure pressure with care, aiming to weaken a war machine while leaving space for post-war recovery and political settlement. So what finally makes a blockade win without storming a capital? It is the steady denial of movement at sea that empties warehouses ashore. Steel mills slow, trucks sit idle, and ammunition plants miss quotas. Armies at the front feel it weeks later when spare parts fail to arrive, when fuel rationing cancels exercises, and when pay chases inflation. A blockade is a campaign against time and appetite. If it holds, the enemy's plans shrink to what his harbors can feed. With this final tactic, the survey comes full circle. From dividing armies in the field to dividing nations from the sea, the constant thread is control of ground, of tempo,